Some people believe jealousy looks loud, dramatic, obvious, but most jealousy is quiet, polite, and socially acceptable, which makes it far more dangerous. You may have seen it in others and dismissed it, or worse, you may have felt it rising inside yourself and called it something else entirely. Jealousy rarely announces itself as envy. It disguises itself as concern, as honesty, as harmless comparison, and that disguise is what allows it to survive. The uncomfortable truth is this: jealous people often believe they are simply being rational, realistic, even supportive. They do not feel malicious, they feel justified. And justification is the most powerful camouflage a fragile ego can wear. What if the behaviors you think are normal reactions are actually silent signals of insecurity competing for control? What if the calm tone hides something far less calm underneath? And what if you have done this without ever noticing? Because jealousy does not begin with hatred, it begins with comparison, and comparison feels harmless at first. But something shifts the moment comparison turns into quiet resentment. That shift is subtle, almost invisible, and most people miss it. The question is not whether jealousy exists. The question is how it behaves when it believes no one is watching. And that is where the illusion begins. Imagine a person who smiles warmly when their friend shares good news. They clap, they congratulate, they even post supportive comments online. Everything looks sincere from the outside. Later that night, they replay the conversation alone, analyzing every detail, measuring their own progress against it, quietly deciding they should have been further by now. Picture someone who insists they are happy for their sibling's promotion. They tell everyone how proud they feel, yet their tone tightens slightly whenever the achievement is mentioned again. Another person casually points out small flaws in someone else's success, framing them as harmless observations, while claiming they simply value balance and realism. From the surface, these reactions appear controlled, measured, reasonable, no anger, no visible hostility, just composed social behavior that seems mature and stable. But control here is not emotional freedom. It is suppression wrapped in politeness, and suppression often feels like strength to the person experiencing it. Jealous individuals rarely identify themselves as jealous because the emotion threatens their self-image of fairness, competence, and emotional stability. So instead of admitting discomfort, they reinterpret it. They rename it concern, or curiosity, or harmless critique, preserving the belief that they are still in control. The illusion forms when they believe their reactions are logical conclusions rather than emotional responses triggered by comparison. They tell themselves they are just being honest, just being observant, just noticing patterns others ignore. And because the behavior does not explode into obvious hostility, it escapes scrutiny, both from others and from themselves. Jealousy in this stage is quiet and calculated, not loud and chaotic, which makes it feel intelligent rather than reactive. They may even pride themselves on how composed they remain during other people's success, believing restraint equals maturity. Yet underneath that restraint, there is a subtle tightening, a small internal narrative asking, "Why not me?" That question rarely surfaces directly. It hides behind productivity, behind self-improvement plans, behind quiet competition masked as inspiration. They begin tracking others unconsciously, comparing milestones, salaries, relationships, achievements, telling themselves it is motivation rather than measurement. In their mind, they are strategizing, optimizing, staying aware of the landscape, never admitting the emotional charge beneath the observation. Because admitting jealousy would mean admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like weakness to a fragile sense of self. So the illusion remains intact. They believe they are steering their reactions consciously, unaware that comparison has already taken the wheel. And what appears as control may actually be the first fracture forming beneath the surface. If this is already making sense to you, it means you're starting to notice patterns most people never see. Subscribe, and let's keep exploring how the mind really works. Now, this is where things start to get uncomfortable. Imagine a person who congratulates a colleague during a meeting, their voice steady, their smile controlled, yet something inside them tightens when the applause lasts longer than expected. Later they replay the scene privately, questioning whether the praise was deserved, searching for small inconsistencies that could reduce its weight in their mind. They do not call this jealousy. They call it critical thinking, fairness, intellectual honesty, and that reinterpretation protects their identity from discomfort. But the first crack appears when the comparison stops being occasional and becomes automatic, almost reflexive whenever someone else rises. What once felt like neutral observation slowly transforms into scanning for hierarchy, measuring value, ranking worth without conscious permission. The unsettling truth is that jealousy often begins as a threat response, not to survival, but to self-image and personal narrative. When someone else succeeds, it quietly challenges the internal story of who deserves recognition, who should be ahead, who imagine themselves different. The mind reacts not with rage, but with subtle recalibration, adjusting perceptions to reduce the discomfort of being outperformed. This recalibration feels intelligent, even sophisticated, because it operates through analysis rather than emotional outburst. Yet beneath that analysis, there is a fragile equation forming. Their success minus my progress equals something missing in me. Instead of confronting that equation directly, the jealous mind searches for variables to discredit, maybe timing, maybe luck, maybe hidden advantages. These explanations are not always false, which makes them even more convincing and harder to question internally. The crack widens when their mood shifts slightly around certain names, certain achievements, certain conversations they once enjoyed freely. They begin to withdraw subtly, not out of hostility, but out of quiet self-protection from repeated comparison triggers. Over time, they feel more alert in social spaces, scanning for signals of status, praise, and shifting dynamics. They may even believe they are simply becoming more observant of human behavior, more aware of social hierarchies. But awareness driven by insecurity carries tension, and tension slowly reshapes perception into competition. The first crack is not explosive, it is subtle, a shift from shared joy to measured evaluation. And once evaluation replaces connection, something fundamental begins to change in how they see others. That change does not stay small for long. Picture someone who grew up hearing comparisons at the dinner table, siblings ranked casually, achievements weighed like currency, praise given sparingly and strategically. As a child, they learned attention was limited, approval was earned through performance, and comparison determined worth within the family structure. Years later, they find themselves reacting strongly to others' success, though no one is competing directly with them anymore. Their body responds before their thoughts do, a subtle tension in the chest, a quiet alertness when someone else is praised. This reaction is not random, it is conditioned, shaped by repeated experiences where status determines safety and belonging. The brain stores those early hierarchies as patterns, linking achievement with approval and comparison with potential rejection. When someone nearby rises, the old circuitry activates automatically, interpreting the situation as a shift in relative position. In that moment, jealousy is less about the other person and more about protecting one's internal ranking system. The mind attempts to restore balance quickly, often by minimizing the threat or questioning its legitimacy. These micro-adjustments happen rapidly, below conscious awareness, which is why they feel like objective reasoning rather than emotional defense. If you have noticed yourself feeling smaller when someone close to you succeeds, describe what happened. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it. Conditioning does not require cruelty to form. Even subtle praise patterns can train the brain to associate comparison with worth. Repeated exposure to competitive environments reinforces the belief that success is scarce and visibility is limited. Scarcity thinking amplifies jealousy because every gain by another feels like a subtraction from oneself. The brain prefers predictability, and jealousy becomes a familiar response that maintains a sense of internal order. It says stay alert, measure constantly, protect your position, even when no real threat exists. Over time, this loop strengthens neural pathways, making comparison quicker and more automatic with each repetition. Eventually, the person believes this vigilance is simply part of their personality, something practical and realistic. But beneath practicality, there is conditioning that benefits from staying active and unchallenged. Because jealousy, when reinforced enough, begins to serve a psychological function that the brain is reluctant to lose. And that function reveals something far more complicated than simple insecurity. Jealousy survives because it offers something in return, even if that return is subtle and rarely acknowledged directly. When someone feels jealous, They momentarily protect their ego from confronting painful feelings of inadequacy or uncertainty. By focusing on what others have gained, they avoid examining what they fear they lack. Comparison becomes a distraction from deeper questions about identity, direction, and self-worth. There is a strange comfort in believing the discomfort is caused externally rather than internally. If someone else's success is the problem, then the self remains intact and unexamined. Jealous thoughts often create a narrative where outcomes are influenced by favoritism, timing, or hidden advantages. That narrative reduces the emotional sting because it reframes the gap as circumstantial rather than personal. This reframing feels stabilizing, almost soothing, because it prevents a collapse of confidence. Jealousy can also create a sense of superiority, especially when flaws are highlighted in others' achievements. By identifying imperfections, the jealous mind restores balance and subtly elevates its own standing. That elevation may be quiet, but it reinforces a fragile self-concept that depends on relative positioning. There is also stimulation in jealousy, a heightened awareness, a sharpened focus on social movement and status. The brain interprets this activation as engagement, even purpose, rather than emotional disturbance. Without realizing it, the person becomes invested in monitoring others as a way of maintaining internal clarity. This monitoring provides structure, a familiar lens through which relationships and environments are interpreted. The hidden payoff is not happiness, it is certainty, even if that certainty is built on distortion. Jealousy offers explanation during moments when self-doubt might otherwise surface unfiltered. It prevents the uncomfortable stillness where deeper insecurities could become visible. And as long as it continues to provide this protection, the mind will resist letting it go. Because removing jealousy would mean facing what it has been shielding all along. Imagine a person who prides themselves on being observant, analytical, someone who claims to see through illusions others miss. They often comment on the hidden factors behind achievements, questioning narratives that seem too polished or celebrated. At first, this looks like intelligence, even discernment, and people may admire their skepticism. But gradually, their commentary appears whenever someone near them progresses, as if growth automatically invites evaluation. They insist they are not jealous, they are simply realistic, unwilling to be naive about how success works. If you have noticed this pattern in your own life, describe what happened. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it. Over time, this stance solidifies into identity. They are the critical thinker, the grounded one, the person who does not get carried away. Admitting jealousy would contradict that identity, threatening the narrative they have built about themselves. So instead of questioning the reaction, they defend it, reinforcing the belief that their perspective is balanced and necessary. The more often this happens, the more comparison becomes embedded into how they interpret every social shift. Eventually, they cannot separate genuine discernment from defensive analysis. The two merge seamlessly. Their friends may sense subtle tension around their achievements, but nothing explicit enough to confront. Inside, however, the person feels increasingly defined by contrast, by where they stand relative to others. Identity becomes relational rather than intrinsic, shaped by hierarchy instead of internal stability. This is the trap. Jealousy no longer feels like an emotion, but like a personality trait. It becomes part of how they describe themselves, careful, realistic, unimpressed by superficial victories. Yet beneath that description is a quiet dependence on comparison to maintain coherence. Without someone to measure against, they may feel disoriented, uncertain of their own value. Jealousy, once defensive, has now become structural, woven into the architecture of self-perception. And dismantling something structural always feels more threatening than confronting a simple emotion. Perspective begins to shift when jealousy is observed without judgment, not condemned or excused, simply noticed as a pattern moving quietly through everyday interactions. This observation does not demand action. It only reveals how often comparison appears without invitation, shaping reactions before conscious intention can intervene. Instead of asking why jealousy exists, attention turns toward how it organizes perception, subtly directing focus toward hierarchy, distance, and imagined imbalance. When seen clearly, jealousy loses some urgency, because urgency depends on believing the story it tells without interruption. The mind starts noticing the moment comparison activates, the slight narrowing of attention, the emotional contraction disguised as analysis. This noticing does not remove the feeling, but it interrupts automatic identification with it. Jealousy becomes something experienced rather than something embodied, a process rather than a personal truth. That distinction alone alters its influence, because what is observed cannot operate invisibly anymore. The reframe is not about denying jealousy. It is about relocating it from identity to experience. Once relocated, it no longer defines character, intelligence, or moral standing. It becomes information about internal pressure points rather than evidence of external injustice. This shift allows curiosity to replace defense, curiosity about why certain comparisons carry more weight than others. Patterns emerge slowly, particular people, environments, or achievements that consistently activate internal tension. Seeing patterns reduces confusion, because confusion thrives when reactions feel random and uncontrollable. With clarity, jealousy stops being proof of inferiority and starts revealing unresolved attachments to specific outcomes. These attachments are rarely conscious, yet they guide emotional responses with surprising precision. The reframe exposes how strongly worth has been outsourced to relative position rather than internal alignment. This realization can feel destabilizing because it removes a familiar explanatory structure. But instability also signals movement, a loosening of rigid narratives that once felt necessary for coherence. Jealousy no longer needs to be justified or hidden because its function has been identified. Identification weakens compulsion, not through force, but through understanding. Understanding creates space, and space changes how emotions pass through awareness. What once felt consuming now feels informative, even neutral at times. And this neutrality opens the door to a quieter internal shift still unfolding. The quiet shift does not announce itself dramatically. It appears gradually as emotional reactions soften around other people's progress and personal milestones. Situations that once triggered comparison now register as simple information, noticed without urgency, without internal commentary racing to assign meaning or threat. There is less impulse to measure outcomes against identity, less pressure to interpret someone else's success as a verdict on personal value. This change feels unfamiliar because intensity was previously mistaken for awareness, and constant evaluation felt like engagement rather than emotional strain. Without continuous comparison, attention begins settling inward naturally, not to criticize, but to observe internal states without defensiveness or urgency. Jealousy may still arise occasionally, but it is recognized earlier, passing through awareness without anchoring itself to extended narratives or self-judgments. The mind no longer demands immediate explanation, allowing emotions to complete their cycle without interference or mental justification from identity. As comparison loses authority, it stops shaping perception automatically, and social moments feel lighter, less charged with silent evaluation pressure. Other people's achievements no longer function as mirrors, reflecting hidden doubts back onto the observer without consent or emotional amplification. Conversations become less performative internally because there is reduced need to protect status or defend imagined positioning within groups socially. Energy once spent tracking others gradually redirects toward presence, resulting in calmer interactions and fewer lingering emotional aftereffects over time. This redirection does not create constant comfort, but it reduces background tension that previously felt normal and unavoidable internally daily. Moments of envy are noticed without alarm, acknowledged briefly, then allowed to dissolve without constructing meaning around them or stories. There is a growing tolerance for uncertainty about one's place, replacing constant measurement with quieter self-awareness over time internally. This tolerance allows experiences to exist without comparison, letting satisfaction and disappointment arise without immediate distortion or defense mechanisms active. The quiet shift feels subtle yet significant, because absence of tension reveals how much effort comparison once required internally daily. In this space, awareness becomes steady rather than reactive, offering clarity without the sharp edges of judgment toward self-identity. And as this steadiness deepens, it prepares the mind for a final reflection that quietly asks who you are without comparison. At some point, the focus turns inward completely, not to analyze others, but but to examine the structure that once depended on comparison for stability. Without the constant reference points of other people's progress, a question begins forming quietly about what defines value when hierarchy is removed. This question feels unsettling because identity may have been constructed through contrast rather than intrinsic clarity for years. When comparison fades, there is no immediate replacement narrative, only open space where self-evaluation once operated automatically. In that space, old assumptions surface, beliefs about worth tied to speed, recognition, productivity, or visible achievement. These beliefs were rarely chosen consciously, yet they shaped emotional reactions with precise consistency over time. The final mirror reflects not jealousy itself, but the framework that allowed jealousy to feel necessary and protective. It reveals how much identity relied on being ahead, or at least not behind, within invisible ranking systems. Seeing this clearly can feel disorienting, because it removes familiar measurements that once structured motivation and self-perception. Yet disorientation also signals honesty, the recognition that comparison was functioning as a substitute for self-definition. When that substitute weakens, there is a temporary quiet where nothing external confirms position or importance. This quiet is not emptiness, but it can feel like it initially, because noise once filled the gap. Gradually, the mind begins noticing experiences without attaching them to relative status or competitive interpretation. Success appears as movement rather than dominance, and failure appears as feedback rather than humiliation. Other people's achievements stop carrying personal meaning, existing independently without distorting internal equilibrium. The final mirror shows that jealousy was never solely about others. It was about maintaining a fragile sense of coherence. Without that fragility, comparison loses emotional weight and becomes optional rather than automatic. And when it becomes optional, identity starts reorganizing around something quieter and less reactive. That reorganization is subtle, almost invisible, but it changes how presence feels internally. In the absence of constant measurement, a more stable awareness begins forming without announcement. And that awareness carries a question that lingers softly. Who are you when no one is being compared? Jealousy was never loud in the way people expect. It moved quietly through ordinary reactions and socially acceptable behavior. It disguised itself as realism, as intelligence, as fairness, blending into identity without drawing attention to its influence. Most people never notice how often comparison directs perception, because it feels natural and even responsible. Yet beneath that natural feeling was a system designed to protect fragile narratives about worth and belonging. When that system is observed rather than obeyed, its intensity decreases without force or dramatic confrontation. Nothing external changes immediately. Other people still succeed, recognition still shifts, hierarchies still exist socially. What changes is the internal interpretation, the reflex to translate every movement into a statement about personal value. That translation once felt automatic and necessary, but it was learned, reinforced, and repeated over time. Seeing it clearly does not require self-punishment or denial, only awareness sustained long enough to notice patterns. Jealousy then becomes information rather than identity, a signal rather than a defining characteristic. And signals lose power when they are no longer mistaken for permanent truths about the self. The quiet shift that follows is not dramatic. It is subtle, unfolding beneath daily interactions without spectacle. You may still feel comparison occasionally, but it no longer dictates emotional direction or social perception automatically. Instead of reacting, there is space. And in that space, a different relationship with yourself begins forming slowly. This relationship does not depend on outperforming, outshining, or outlasting anyone else around you. It rests on awareness rather than ranking, observation rather than defense. If something in this reflection felt familiar, let it linger quietly rather than resolving it immediately. Because the most important shifts rarely happen through force, they happen through recognition. And recognition begins the moment you notice how you behave when no one is watching.